So by the time we get to Genesis 18, everything's set, right? Abram's got a new name. Sarai's got a new name. We even know the name of their future son, Isaac. That's been told to us by God in chapter 17. Now, we've been waiting a long time, so hopefully the storyteller is ready to tell us the story of the promised son, right? I mean, that's what we would be expecting, but not quite so fast. Look at chapter 18, verse 1. And the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. Now these texts, I'll just tell you up front, you might want to read them on your own because they're really interesting, and there's a lot of questions about who exactly Abraham's talking to and when he's talking to them. So some pretty interesting stuff. But you see what happens here. The Lord appears to Abraham, but then he sees 3 men standing outside his tent, and he's going to have this interaction with them. So what's this all about? Abraham sees these 3 guys. He invites them in, shows them hospitality. Sarah starts getting everything ready for a meal, and they start taking care of these guys. Well, Abraham's sitting talking with these guys, and they say to him in verse 9, "Hey, where's Sarah, your wife?" He says, "Well, she's in the tent." And then listen to the promise of God in chapter 18, verse 20. Or no, I'm sorry, 18:10. The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." You see it? 24 years we've been waiting. Abraham's been waiting 99 years for this. This time, Abraham, next year, Sarah is going to have a son. She's going to hold a son of her own. This time, next year. Now where's Sarah? Well, she's in the tent, but where is she? She's actually doing something that women like to do a lot in the early books of the Bible. She is eavesdropping on the conversation. Because look at verse 10 at the end. And Sarah was listening in at the tent door behind Abraham. And what happens? She hears this promise. Next time she's having a baby. And what does she think? Me? I'm so old. She starts laughing about this. Am I really at 90 years of age going to have a son? And she starts laughing. But the Lord doesn't think that's very funny, that she's laughing. Because look at what the Lord says. Verse 13. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? What do you think?" And then God reiterates, "This time, next year, Abraham, you guys are having a son." And then Sarah kind of peeks in maybe or out from the tent and just says, "Let me clarify, I was not laughing. I just want that to go down in the record. I wasn't the one laughing. You must have heard something else." And the Lord says, "No, you did laugh, Sarah." Reminds me of conversations with children when you catch them doing something they're not supposed to do. "Why were you doing that?" "It wasn't me." No. I know. It was you. And that's what God seems to be doing with Sarah. But she is laughing because this seems incredible. This seems impossible to her. But remember the question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? What do you think? Now, it turns out that those guys that came to Abraham that day to deliver that message were actually on a mission to do something else as well. And so they start talking with each other. Should we tell Abraham what else we're going to do? Or shouldn't we? And they say, you know what? Let's tell him. Let's tell him what we're about to do. So they go to Abraham and they say, "Hey, listen. God has sent us to go to Sodom and Gomorrah and to bring destruction on the cities. Complete and total destruction." Now that's where Lot, Abraham's nephew, lives. And they say, we're gonna destroy it all. Now what does Abraham do when he hears that God is going to bring judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah because of how evil those cities have become? I mean, here you have Abraham, a man of God, a man who trusts God, who's righteous before God. And what will he do when he gets the news that those cities, those evil cities, are going to be doomed to destruction? You know what he does? He starts pleading with God for those cities and for his nephew. He starts begging God, pleading with God, praying to God for the sake of the cities, for the sake of his nephew, his family members. He starts interceding. See, Abraham is trying to go between the evil cities and God, who's righteous to judge them. And he's pleading with God, please don't do it. Don't do it. And he starts asking, oh God, what if you found 50 righteous people in the cities? Wouldn't you spare those cities if there were just 50 righteous people in the cities? I mean, won't the judge of all the earth do right? He asks God. And God says, sure, Abraham. If I found 50 righteous people down there, I wouldn't destroy them. And then Abraham thinks, well, what if there were just like 5 less, 45? You wouldn't judge them, right? God says, no. What about 40? And Abraham goes all the way down to 10, and he pleads with God, oh God, what if there were 10? Wouldn't you spare the cities for 10? And God says, I would, even if there were 10. But the truth is, there aren't 10. There aren't 10 righteous people in those cities. Those cities are full of sin and wickedness. And God has decreed destruction. Their time is up. Destruction's on the way. Well, the two of the angels, they leave and they go down to Sodom in chapter 19. And that's where we have to go in the story too. And this is one of the things about the Bible. Sometimes the Bible takes us to places we really don't want to go, to see things that we really don't want to see. And this is one of those places. The two angels go down into the city to find Lot because they want to rescue Lot and whoever Lot can get out of the city with him so that he won't be destroyed with the city. Well, the angels go to Lot and they tell him what's going to happen, that Lot needs to get his family and get out. Lot tries to get some of the people. He doesn't really want to leave, but he tries to convince some of his family. A lot of his family thinks he's absolutely crazy. They don't want to leave. But then these guys, these two angels, are going to stay out in the city, and Lot says, do not do that. You stay under my roof tonight. Trust me. They don't really want to, but he said, no, you must do it. You have to. Why? So this is going to be what we don't want to see. Lot has these two men stay in his home that night, and before they go to bed, Genesis 19 verse 4, we get to see a glimpse of what's going on in Sodom. 19:4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. Which is to say, send out those men so that we can basically rape those men. We want those men out here. Send them out to us. Lot comes outside, closes the door behind him, says, oh, brothers, don't do such a thing. I mean, think that he's calling these guys his brothers, don't do this. And then Lot says, look, I've got 2 virgin daughters of my own inside. Guys, I'll bring them out. You can do what you want with my daughters all night long. Just don't touch those men. But the truth is, those guys out there, they don't want the daughters. They want the men. And so the angels have to strike them with blindness, and they're still groping at the door, trying to get in to satisfy their sexual lust for homosexual acts, for sin. And the angels are saying, God, Lot, we are getting you and your family out of here. These cities are under the ban of God. They're going to be cursed. They're going to be destroyed, razed to the ground. Well, Lot gets his wife and those 2 girls, the 2 girls he's just offered, and he takes them out of the city. But it's like these 2 angels really have to drag Lot and his family out. They don't really want to go. Sodom's got too much a hold of their hearts. In fact, on the way out, Lot's wife turns back to look to the city because her heart is there in Sodom. And God strikes her dead on the way out. And now it's just Lot and these 2 girls that are rescued out of the city. And then God, in his anger and his wrath against the evil and sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, rains down fire from heaven and completely annihilates the cities. and rescues only Lot and those two girls. And then we're taken somewhere even worse that we would never want to go. As far as being a reader of the Bible, Lot and his two daughters are up in the mountains, and we read this story at the end of chapter 19 about these girls getting their dad drunk, sleeping with their dad, and this is how the nations of Moab and Ammon come to be. And we're like, what in the world are we reading? This is so bad. This is stuff we would never want to read. But this is the origin of these other nations that God is raising up from Lot. And we leave that story. We feel like we need to take a shower. We don't want to read. We don't want to think about the stuff that's in those chapters. And then we go to chapter 20, a very different kind of story. But then we're like, what's the deal with this? Are you serious? Abraham and Abimelech is what this story is about. And really, it's like almost a flashback to Genesis 12. Abraham and Sarah are still lying about their relationship with each other. And it puts Sarah in a whole bunch of trouble. Abraham is again using Sarah as a shield for himself to protect himself. And God has to do miraculous things to deliver Sarah and Abraham from Abimelech, who's like, what's the deal with this? Why didn't you guys just tell me? Abimelech is presented as being way more righteous than Abraham in this account. And we're like, what is going on with these stories? And I want to look at where it ends. Genesis chapter 20. Because what did God do to protect Sarah and Abraham? He brought judgment on Abimelech and on his house, even though Abimelech was really innocent. And so Abraham then prays for Abimelech in chapter 20, verse 17. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Now, I'm still, after many years of working through these texts, these are interesting texts for me. Like, why are they here in the story? Part of it, I think, is the author is delaying what we're waiting for, because it's building suspense. We're like, when is God going to do what he promised? Now it's been like 10 chapters almost, right? And we've been waiting for the birth of Isaac. So that's maybe one thing that's going on. But why these stories? What do we pick up from these stories? I mean, we saw Abraham interceding for the wicked. I mean, that's interesting. But what about Sodom and Gomorrah? What do you see about God? You see something with Sodom and Gomorrah that you really only have ever seen at the flood. The judgment of God coming down on the heads of the wicked. God knows how to judge. Oh, he's patient. But when it's time for judgment, God knows how to judge. And God knows how to rescue people. He rescues Lot. He rescued Noah, even though you'd say, well, Lot's a lot different than Noah, and he is. But God knows how to judge, and God knows how to rescue. But what about all that nasty stuff with Lot and his daughters? At least one thing you gather from that is, you know what? From Sodom, God can destroy nations in a moment. But God can raise up nations however he wants. God is completely, what I might call, what we usually say, sovereign, or in control of the nations. He can bring nations to the ground in a moment like he does at Sodom and Gomorrah. But God can bring nations out of horrible circumstances if he wants to. He raises up nations from the most unexpected and even grotesque circumstances because God has power over all the nations on earth. When God promises to Abraham and Sarah, nations are going to come from you, God can do it. He can do anything he wants with the nations. But I might draw our attention especially to the end of chapter 20. God has the power over the womb. Everything in the story is now waiting for God to do something miraculous with Sarah's womb. For him to open up the womb of an old lady so she'll be able to bear a son that the world needs. And chapter 20 tells us, you know what? God has the power to close the womb. That's what he did with Abimelech and all of Abimelech's people, so that they couldn't have even one offspring, because God is completely sovereign over offspring. And then when Abraham prayed, God opened up the wombs. He has the power to close the womb, and he has the power to open the womb, because God is sovereign over offspring. And our whole hope, the whole hope for the world, is that God will do that in the life of a barren woman who's about 90 years of age. Maybe, just maybe, we're about to turn the page and read how God's going to do that with Sarah.